Well, welcome to the training. What we'll go through is I'm going to go ahead and mute your line, Juliet, just to
Yep.
take care of the noise here. Okay. Welcome. My name is Josh Prue with Safe and Reliable Healthcare. We're going to be going through the links to the reporting platform that you received and talk about how you can generate additional links as well as how to properly read each of the reports. We'll go ahead and get started with the summary report. You'll have received this as a PDF, but there's also a link in the email that you received that will generate a summary report that would look similar to this. When you first land on this report, you'll see some basic demographic information and response report information about the survey that was administered with your group. And then this template over the next couple of pages is designed to give just a couple of the highlights so you can see all of the overall scores as well as certain questions and key domains and key questions that are considered to be very important on the report. So on the second page, you'll see a table that looks similar to this, which will give you the percent positive for each one of the domains that was administered in your score survey administration. This is the percent positive, so this is the percentage of people in your particular survey area that we consider to have a good overall composite question response to each one of the questions within the domain. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but essentially what we do is we create an average score for each individual based on how they answered each one of the questions in the domains. And then if that composite score is above a certain threshold, we then consider that individual to be positive overall for that domain. So in this column here, you're seeing the percent positive, and then in the right-hand side, you're seeing the benchmark percentile. And so as a reminder, higher percentiles are better. The highest percentile possible is 99th percentile, and the lowest is first. And the correct way to read that is, at 54% positive for this demo data set, that is a better score than 16% of all other groups that have surveyed. This is actually in this demo data set is using a US percentile, but on all of the reports you will have received, it is just looking at UK benchmarks. So you're only being compared to other groups in the NHS that have surveyed with a score survey. So all of the domains here are broken out into culture domains as well as the engagement. On the next page, you'll have a couple of scatter plots. What we're doing here is showing you the percent positive on the teamwork domain on the x-axis compared to the percent positive on the safety domain. And so we've arrayed all of the work settings in your survey administration and on both the X and the Y axis based on how they've scored. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner here is a red area between 0 and 60%. And so if both the teamwork percent positive and the safety climate percent positive is less than 60%, in both of the domains, your work setting will be in this area. The 5 lowest areas that fall in this box and based on how close they are to this 0% are displayed in the bottom left. If you have any work settings that are between 70 and 100% positive in both the domains, you'll see those listed here in the top right. So the first scatter plot here is based on by work setting, and then the bottom one is based on position type. So we're looking at the same thing, but grouping your results by the different position types that individuals self-reported as their role based on what their position type is in their work area. On the next page, we've got another set of scatter plots, only this is the improvement readiness by local leadership. We've found in our benchmarking data that most of these two domains are highly correlated in most data sets. And so we're showing how in your data that it's likely also correlated, and groups that tend to do higher in one domain also tend to do higher in another. On the next page here, we've got some key questions based on the percentiles. And on the left-hand side here, you'll see this broken out on the culture questions, and on the right-hand side, the engagement questions. So what we've done here is taken the top 3 questions based on the benchmark percentile. So these may not be the highest percent positive in terms of absolute numbers, but compared to the benchmarking data set, these are the questions that you did the best in compared to all other groups in the UK that surveyed, and these are the culture questions that had the lowest benchmark scores compared to other groups in the UK. So at the top here, I can see that for this particular group, they were in the 83rd percentile, meaning they did better than 83% of all other groups that administered the survey for this particular question about skipping a meal. And then down below, they had some questions in the single-digit percentiles as well. So this is a great place to look in terms of comparing your group to all other groups in terms of the unique strengths and weaknesses for the culture questions, and then on the right side for the engagement questions.
Can I just ask, sorry Josh, in the cultural strength, surely it's not a strength to skip a meal, or is that just the way, it's one of those?
That's a great question. So you'll notice that some questions are positively worded and some questions are negatively worded. So the correct way to read this is, for this particular topic, we did really good at that. And so likely they had very few people respond saying that they skipped a meal. So yeah, it's not saying the exact wording is a strength. It's just for this question, we answered it very well, whether it was a positively or negatively worded question. Yeah, great question. And that same principle applies down here as well too, and throughout the rest of the report. You'll notice that some of these questions are positively worded and others are negatively worded. We take care of that and make sure to flip them in terms of how we consider that in the scoring. So if you look here, the percent positive in each one of these circle diagrams represents the individuals who had answered the question either agreeing slightly or strongly or disagreeing slightly or strongly with a statement in such a way that green is good. So you always want the highest percent positive for every domain and every question, regardless of how the question was originally worded. So the proper way to read this here, the percentage in green is the percent positive. Those in yellow, percent neutral. If you hover over that, you can see the score there. And those are the ones that answered neutral for this particular question. And then the negative are those that either answered agree or disagree, depending on the wording. But those are the red, you'd always want to have the smallest percentage. The green, you'd always want to have the highest percentage. So you can always remember that green is good. The questions, there's one or more questions from each of the domains. These were picked as key driver questions for a couple of reasons. For most of these domains, these questions are the ones that correlate the most with the rest of the questions in the domain. Or they're also questions that are very good to discuss in a debriefing setting and are very easy to create an action plan around. So we've picked these questions as ideal questions to talk about in your group when you're debriefing. Below that, you'll see a button here that allows you to display results for all survey items. If you go ahead and click this, it'll generate an additional 2 or 3 pages in your report. And on the PDFs that were emailed out to each of you, we went ahead and clicked on this button to give you a little more detail on that PDF version of this report that you received by email. So this will then display each of the questions in the domains. It'll list the question text to the left. The percent positive is the percentage of people that answered this question in the desirable way. So they were either agreeing with a positively worded statement or they were disagreeing with a negatively worded statement. And that it also matches the percent green that you'll see to the right. So again, green is good. You'd want to see as little red as possible. You can hover over and see the neutral and negative percentages if you're looking at this online with the link. And each of the questions in this are arrayed so that the question you did the best at is at the top of the domain, and then the ones that you had the lower score is at the lower end of the domain. So this is repeated for all of the domains in the survey. There is one domain at the bottom that I'll call out that is a little bit different. This is the Workload Strain domain. And for this domain, we don't actually do the red, yellow, and green coloring. Rather, we just indicate the percent that was strained, and so that is displayed in blue. In this area, there's still a lot of research that's going on, and so we're withholding actually calling whether this is a good or a bad thing to say that you're strained. But it is the percentage of people that are agreeing with each of these statements and the level of strain there. After that section here, there's one final page on the summary report that gives you the final response rate for your survey based on the work setting. You can see the response rate in the first column, the number of responses in the second column, and then the denominator in the last column. If there's any work setting that received less than a 40% response rate or fewer than 4 responses, you'll see it indicated on the left-hand side here, and that particular work setting would not have a report available to them. With your groups, I think there was very few or none of the areas that didn't make that minimum, so you should be able to see an additional work setting report on almost all of your areas. So we'll take a look at that next. This was the overall report, but if you clicked up on the top left here where it says all surveyed work settings, you'll see a drop down and you can pick a report that is filtered down to just that particular work setting. I'm going to go ahead for this demo data set and click on the emergency department and just highlight some of the differences that are on this report versus the overall report. So on the first page, the demographic and response rate information is now just talking about this particular work setting. And then on the second page, you've got a similar chart with an additional column. So again, this is listing the percent positive, only this is now for the work setting. So this is my score for the emergency department here. There was 45% that were positive for the improvement readiness domain. And this is in comparison to 54% in the second column, which it lists hospital percent positive, but it's the full group that was surveyed. So in your case, all of the work settings. And these scores here will match what you saw on the overall report that we were looking at a few minutes ago. So if you supply this report to the work setting managers, they can see how they did compared to everyone else in the group that was surveyed at your facility. And then finally, they have their own work setting percentile benchmarks. So they can get the benchmark score for their own work setting percent positive. This is, again, for both the culture and the engagement domains. On the next page, there are also scatter plots with just a few differences. Now, instead of labeling all of the work settings that are in the lower left and then the top right, we only label the one work setting for this report and highlighted that in a darker color. So this is a blinded report. They can't see the names of the work settings that did better or worse for them or compared to them. But they do see how they are, and then they get to see where all of the other work settings in your facility fell in terms of scores. If that work setting had enough individuals where there's a breakdown for 2 or more position types, you'll have a second scatter plot here that'll give the breakdown by position types. They're labeled here, and you can look to the right and see, that the nurses' aides were right here, the nurses were right there. The relative size indicates larger groups. If your group had fewer responses, so that maybe there's only like one position type and other, this scatter plot is skipped for them, and they would only just receive 2 scatter plots that go give the results by work setting. So in this particular case, this group does have enough data to show the breakdown by position type, and so there are 2 pages of scatter plots available for them. On the next page, a similar view to what we were looking at for the overall survey, only now it's filtered to just that particular work setting. So now I'm looking at the cultural strengths for the emergency department. These were the top 3 questions. that had the highest benchmark score for the emergency department, and then the lowest three for the cultural group, and then the same breakdown for the engagement. One note I'll call out, for the engagement side, we don't actually include the workload strain questions in this. So on the left-hand side, this is out of all of the the cultural domains, and then this is engagement without workload strain. And then finally, there's a list of the key driver questions here. Similar interpretation: green is good, red is those that are negative, and then yellow is neutral, and this is filtered down to just the work setting area. You can also generate a detailed report of all of the questions for the work setting report. If you click on the bottom button, you'll also note that there's no additional page with a full response report. We only display the response report information for this work setting, and that's done so on the first page. So I've gone ahead and generated the more detailed work setting report, and I have those additional questions listed on the last couple of pages. For any of these reports, if you go ahead after you're ready with the report being displayed on the left, you can click in the top right, and that'll save that as a PDF. So again, for the summary reports, the link you receive, you can switch from the overall report by picking the all surveyed work settings option, or you can select a particular work setting here. Once you have those saved, you typically would send those to the local work setting managers so that they have the report available for reviewing the data. You can send them the link that you received here with a summary report, but just keep in mind that they would be allowed to see the results for any one of the groups if you did so. If you would like to receive a link for each one of the work settings that only allows them to view that particular work setting, just respond to the email that you received and we can send you links. Otherwise, you could just go ahead and use the main link and save them as PDFs and forward that on to your work setting managers. Any questions on the summary report before we take a look at the more detailed reports that are available? Okay. All right. So in addition to the summary report link, you will have also received a link to the full reporting platform, and this would have contained a username and password right below that link. Once you log into your data set there, you'll see a pop-up that looks like this that contains the report wizard. On the left-hand side here, there's a list of different report templates that are available, and you'll notice that you'll have each one of those three main report types listed here as the overview report, the work setting reports, and the combined work setting reports. And we've given you three versions of those. One that'll give you the full domain, culture and engagement, another that'll filter down to just the culture domains, and another that filters down to just the engagement domains. So you can very quickly switch between a display of the domains here. You'll notice that that changes the list of domains that are selected on the report, but you can further refine this by unchecking or checking one of the domains here. So if, for example, I wanted to generate a report on just the culture domains, but maybe wanted to leave off the work-life balance, I could just uncheck that here, and that would generate the report with just these culture domains in it. I'm going to go ahead and pick the default report, which is the overview report with culture and engagement. And I'm going to leave all of the other default options to the right selected. This is the version of the report that you also received as the second PDF in the email. And we'll talk about these report options in just a few minutes. But I'm going to go ahead and click Generate Report on this and walk through the slides. So you'll see a progress bar indicating the number of slides that have been generated so far. Once that's complete and at 100%, this will dismiss, and then you can scroll through the report here on the left-hand side, and if you left-click on each one of the slides, you can see a full view of the slide here. The first page has some demographic information similar to the first page on the summary report, and then the next two pages just give a little bit more information about the survey, similar text to what's shown on the front of the summary report. But if we scroll down here, you'll find that there's 3 slides per domain that are listed in this particular report. The first one is a radar, or otherwise called a spider diagram. In this, you've got a circle here, and it's listing the percentage of people who either agree slightly or agree strongly with each of the questions that are arrayed on this radar diagram. So the correct way to read this here at like 12 o'clock, the question is, in this work setting, the learning environment utilizes inputs and suggestions from the people that work here. It's excuse me, it's listed as 60% that agree either slightly or strongly with a statement, and that's out of 766 people in this demo data set that answered the question. So you will notice that some of the questions here may have slightly different numbers, and that's based on whether somebody skipped a question or two. All questions on the survey were optional, and so you may see some variation between the numbers of people that answered each question. So then around 2 o'clock, I've got 59% that agreed with this second statement here within the domain. You'll notice that the coloring goes from red in the center of the radar diagram to green on the outside, and that helps you orient to the fact that the more people agreed with this statement, the more positive they would be, and so the higher your score, the more in the green. The ideal score would be out here at 100% that were agreeing with each of these statements, and the least desirable scores would be towards the center with nobody agreeing with those statements in the domain. As we go through, you'll see that there's a few other domains that have negatively worded statements, and the coloring is a little bit different, so we'll talk about that in a minute. As we mentioned earlier, we create a composite or domain score for each individual, and this is based on how they answered all of the questions. So essentially, if you take this learning environment domain, we would average out how the person agreed or disagreed with each of these statements here and come up with a composite. So if I had disagreed slightly to one of the statements and maybe agreed strongly to all of the rest of the questions in a domain, I'd probably have an average score that would fall somewhere between agree strongly and agree slightly. And for most of these domains, if you at least agree slightly or above, you're considered positive for the domain, and that is the percentage here in green that you're seeing here. So another way of thinking about these domain scores is this is basically the percentage of individuals that we say are passing for the domain, or in other words, have a high enough composite score overall. So in this second slide here for the domain, you're seeing a bar chart that'll list all of the work settings in your group that surveyed and the percentage of individuals who are considered positive for that domain listed in green. Again, all of the reports, green is good, red is bad, and so regardless of whether the domain has positively or negatively worded questions, you want to have as much green as possible and as little red as possible. So the correct way to read this here is nuclear medicine had 5 individuals who answered at least one or more of the questions within the improvement readiness domain, and 100% of those 5 individuals were considered positive with their composite score. So you typically have the work settings up here that have very good scores, and at many institutions you'll have work areas that have much lower scores. Now, in most of your surveys, you had fewer work settings that were surveyed. This is more of the size of like an average hospital, a smaller size hospital, and it's very common to see a very large difference between the lowest scoring work setting and the highest scoring work setting in a group like this. To the right, we have benchmarking information. The first line will display what's in the benchmark, and your reports, it'll be based on UK benchmark groups. And then on the second line, it'll display the 25th percentile percent positive right here at 53%, the 50th percentile, which is also the median at 68% in this case, and then the 75th percentile at 82%. And those lines are drawn here on the chart. So this middle line right here is the median. So an easy way to look at that is for this particular group here, I can see that almost all of their work settings were lower than the median So in other words, almost all of the work settings here had a score that was worse than half or more of the groups that are comprised in the benchmark. So this last line here, the second to the last line here where it says n equals a certain number of responses, in this case it's 153,000 in this US benchmark. That's the number of people that are in the benchmark for these improvement readiness domain. And this is based off of just over 6,000 units or departments that answered the question. In your reports, it'll have some different numbers here, and that's based on the UK benchmarks, which have fewer respondents than the US one. On all of the bar charts, you can always look at the bottom and you'll see additional information that'll help you know exactly what this percentage is displaying here. So again, this is saying this is those that reported good improvement readiness and a higher score is better. On the bottom left here, you've got a legend that'll indicate when the survey was administered, which institution you're looking at, which work settings are selected. If you had happened to create a filter and you were only picking some of the work settings, that would be reported here, and which position types. And in the default report here, we're looking at all work settings and all position types. So then the last slide in this particular domain here is giving you a similar view to the second one, but instead of breaking it out by work setting, it's breaking it down by position type. Not surprisingly here, in this demo data set, you can see that the top two position types were manager position types. These are slightly different breakdown here for the US groups. You had UK specific position types that were asked on your survey. But this is not an uncommon thing to see, where your managers tend to have much higher positive scores than the rest of the group. And so the report slides that show you the breakdown by position type are a great one to show in your debriefing sessions when you're talking about some discrepancies between different position types. So again, this is the percent positive. Green is good, and I'd ideally want to have as high of a score as possible. You'll notice that there's no benchmarking information that's displayed for the position types. At this time, we're not producing benchmarks based on position types, but that is a feature that we're planning in the future. As the benchmark grows, we will have specific benchmarks for different position types. Those three slides then repeat for all of the domains in the survey. I'll get the local leadership next. And now if you look at the burnout climate domain, you'll notice that the coloring is different, with more red being displayed. So all of the questions in this domain were negatively worded. For example, here at 12 o'clock, events in this work setting affect the lives of people here in an emotionally unhealthy way, and 47% either agreed with that statement, either slightly or strongly, and obviously the higher percentage that would agree with that, the more negative. And so we've flipped the coloring here to help you as a visual aid that you'd want to have as low of a score as possible, with people agreeing with that statement, and that's where the green is displayed in the center and the red is displayed on the outside. So on the next slide here, we're now looking at the percentage of people that are considered burned out. So we're looking at a negative group here, and then a lower score is more desirable. So again, you can remember green is good, red is not good, and so you'd want to have as little red as displayed and have lower percent burned out on these charts here. You'll also know that notice that the percentiles are flipped as well here. So the 25th percentile is at 71%. The median is still in the middle, and then the 75th percentile is at 38%. So those that have a lower score than 38% on this particular slide would be those that did better than 75% or more of the benchmark. There's one last group here that looks a little bit different, and that is the workload strain. And similar to what you saw in the other report, we display this just in blue rather than displaying green, yellow, or red on this. And so this is the percentage of people that are reporting workload strain. Now, while we aren't coloring that for the purposes of The question slides, we did have to at least make a call when it came to the benchmarking. And so for the benchmarking, it's considering a lower score to be better for benchmarking purposes when calculating the percentiles. There's two additional radar slides in this, that one is found in the middle of the report and another at the end. And this is giving you the percent positive for each of the domains in the culture domain section, and then at the very end it's the percent positive for the engagement domains. You'll notice that these scores are the same as what you would see in that second page of the summary report. And again, if you take a look at the coloring on the outside, we've got the green on the outside. So just like with some of the questions, we have flipped for the purposes of being consistent, the two negative domains here, the personal burnout and burnout climate. So the correct way to read this is 43% of individuals are positive in the personal burnout domain, and 25% are positive in the burnout climate domain. If we jump back to some of the other domains here, you'll notice on the radars that you can have a mix of positively worded and negatively worded questions within a domain. That's true for the safety climate and the teamwork domain, for example. And the reason why there is a mix is for some statements, it just would be awkward to read them flipped. And so let me give you an example here on the teamwork domain here. So the first question asked in the teamwork domain is, disagreements in this work setting are appropriately resolved, i.e. not who is right, but what is best for the patient. Obviously, that's a positively worded question. The more people would agree with that, the better the response. And so as this number goes up, it goes into the green area. The second question in this domain was, in this work setting, it is difficult to speak up if I perceive a problem with patient care. So the original question that was asked on the survey did not have this capital not in there. And you'll notice that the easier way of reading that question is without that capital not. And so as a result, that was a negatively worded question in the teamwork domain. But in order to display the data on a radar, you have to have all of the questions aligned, either positively worded or negatively worded within the domain. And so for the purposes of the report, we have inserted a capital not in here to flip this question and this question, and then these last two questions as well too. So it still holds that this is the percentage of people that agree with the statement as written here, but the original question was negatively worded, and so this 58% is technically the percentage of people who disagreed with the original question. So again, you don't need to worry about that as much when you read it. You always want to remember that green is good, and so you can know that a higher percentage on all of these questions is desirable, because you'd want to see these scores out in the green area. Any questions on the data visualizations that we've talked about in here before we take a look at some of the report generation options? Yes, is there a question? I can hear somebody's unmuted, but I didn't hear the actual text of the question. Okay. I don't think there was a question then. We'll go ahead and then go back to the report wizard. If I click on the new report, I'll be given the confirmation saying, are you sure you want to generate a new report and throw away the one that you've got right now? I'm going to go ahead and click on confirm, and then I'm back to that report wizard. So I'm going to go ahead and walk through some of the options here. We've talked about how this box selects which domains are displayed on the report. In the top right, you can now filter which work settings are in the report. And if I wanted to, I could just pick some of the work settings, and then I would have a report that was generated with just that subpopulation of those that answer the survey. I'm going to go ahead and reset it to everyone though. And then I can also do a filter based on the position types. So any position type that had 4 or more individuals who responded to the survey is listed here. If there's a position type that had fewer than 4 individuals, they would be grouped into the other category. So again, I can pick which populations I want to have in here. One common option is to maybe generate a report that just has the nursing staff, and I'll go ahead and do that here. And what you'll see on the reports is a breakdown of just the nurses. And this is a great kind of report to give to the senior leadership who are over the nursing staff. But again, you could pick any combination of position types that you want for an additional report. So this next option here allows you to pick whether you want to have a more detailed report. If I were to uncheck this right here, I would lose those bar charts that give me the breakdown by the work setting. If I were to uncheck this, I would lose the breakdown by the position type. I'm going to go ahead and leave those on there. If I include these additional options here, I'll get a breakdown of the report by all of the work settings for each question, and then for all of the questions based on the breakdown by the domains. So I'm going to go ahead and rather than run this filtered just down to nurses, I'm going to select everyone again and run a more detailed report and just show you the difference in the slides that you have. You'll notice that this is a much larger report. For the full score, this is around 200 pages now. And so you've got an additional view into the data here. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. It'll still continue to load in the background. So again, we've got the first slide is the same for each of the domains. It's the radar. The second slide is also the same. It's the breakdown by work setting with a combined domain score. But then the third slide is different. I've now got a breakdown by work setting for each one of the questions within the domain. And you can see that there is some variation between each of the questions within the domain. And you can also see that I'm seeing the percent positive in green, the neutral in yellow, and then the red, the negative individuals for each of the questions. Again, it doesn't matter whether the question is written positively or negatively. Green is always good. So for a positively worded question, green is representing those individuals that agreed either slightly or strongly with the question, and the red is those that disagreed slightly or strongly. If this was a negatively worded question, the green would be those that disagreed slightly or strongly, and the red would be those that agreed slightly or strongly. So again, green is good, and I always want to see as much green as possible on each of these. You'll notice that the benchmarking is also being displayed for any of the bar charts that give you the results by work setting, and you'll see some variation in those benchmarks from question to question. The next slide in here is the same as what we saw before, where it was giving a breakdown of the composite or domain score by the position types. But because I put down that additional checkbox, I'm also getting a breakdown for each of the questions by position type. And so I can see that for each question now by position type. So this gives you a much more detailed report to look at if you wanted to see a breakdown down to the question level for each work setting or position type. I'm going to go ahead and go back up to the new report and take a look at some of the other report options here. If, for example, I didn't want the positive, neutral, and negative breakdown, I could uncheck this, and on the question types, I would either see just a green bar for most domains, or in the case of the burnout domains, I would see a red bar, and so this would give you a little bit less detail. Most people prefer to see that extra detail of where the positive, neutral, and negative falls, because one thing to keep in mind with those that are neutral here, these are those people that were on the fence. They said neutral to the statement, and those might be your areas of best opportunity, the easiest to get over into the green territory that wouldn't compare to those that were negative for each of the questions. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at some of the options here as well. So if we wanted to pick the work setting report, this here will give me a report for each one of the work settings that are selected. This is similar to the drop down in the summary report where I pick one of the work settings and generate a report just for the local manager for that group, like the emergency department. If I go ahead and leave all of my work settings selected and then run this report, you'll see that it's going to generate one report for each work setting, save that as an individual PDF, and then automatically move to the next one. I have similar options here. If I wanted to have more detailed reports for each of the work settings, I could check these two boxes here. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it at the default here with a little bit less detail and a smaller, more manageable report for each of those work setting managers to view. There is an additional option here to hide the work setting labels, and I'll show you both results. I'm going to go ahead and leave this unchecked, and this will be a fully transparent and unblinded report. You'll see there's two progress bars now. The top one is telling you what percentage of reports have been completed. The bottom one is telling you the percent complete for the current report. And in the text up here, I can see that I was generating the report for 3rd East. Once that 3rd East report is done, it starts an automatic download to my computer. And you may get a pop-up the first time you run this that'll ask if you want to allow the website to save multiple files. You want to go ahead and allow that. And if you do so, then this will just go through and automatically generate a report for each one of the work settings, and it'll have the work setting name in the PDF that's stored on your computer, so you can easily go down and look at your your downloads default folder, and all of the reports will be generated there. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel here, and it'll actually stop on one of the reports, and we can just look at some of the key differences. Again, the radar is very similar to what we were looking at before, only now it's filtered down to just the report for the people in 6th East. So I'm only looking at the 25 or so people that answered the report for the 6th East work setting in this example. Because I ran an unblinded report, when I look at the breakdown by work setting, I'm seeing the names of all of the work settings on the left. And I'll show you what the view looks like if you want to blind this report in just a minute. And then the third slide is giving me the breakdown by position type. But again, it's only for the 6th East group, and it'll only display the work setting, the position types that had 4 or more responses, and that's to protect individual anonymity. If there is any position types that had fewer than 4 responses, they would be put into an other category. And if that other category had fewer than 4, it is not displayed. So for example, if you had a work setting that had 9 nurses in it and 1 physician, and all of them responded to the survey, you'd end up with just one bar chart showing the 9 nurses. You wouldn't have a bar chart that says other with just 1 response, because that wouldn't be as useful to look at one individual, and it also could compromise the individual responses. So that is repeated then for all of the domains. If I were to go back to the new report option, I could go ahead and pick the hide work setting labels. And if I generate that report, it's a blinded report similar to what we looked at in the summary report, where you do not see the names of the work settings that scored better or worse than you. You only have your work setting that's titled, and you can still see how you did in comparison to the others, but you don't have the names of the groups that did better or worse than you. There are a few other report types as well here. There's a combined work setting report. This is probably not as applicable to your group, given that you only had a few work settings that were surveyed in each facility. This is typically used if someone wanted to generate a report for like all of the inpatient work settings, or maybe all of the groups that report to a particular individual. It generates a report that's identical to the overview report with one exception. It allows you, so let me go ahead and pick an example here where I've picked a couple of the work settings. We'll just pretend for a moment that those were all inpatient work settings. Rather than displaying each one of those work setting names in the legend, I can rename what that description of those work settings are called. I can say these are all the inpatient clinical units, And so the report is identical to the overview report, but it gives you control over what's displayed in the legend for that. And so that's the combined work setting report. Finally, I'll just talk about a few of the other buttons here. And up top here, you can save the report as a PDF once you're done. You can also export as a CSV. What this would do is give you a CSV file which could be loaded in Excel, and that would cover all of the numbers that are displayed in every single bar chart in the report. So there's never a need to write out by hand all of the numbers if you wanted to generate additional graphics or correlate your data in Excel or any other platform that takes a CSV file. You can just simply click export a CSV and that'll save, and you can look at that data in another platform. Then log out would obviously log you out of your data set. Add slide. This allows you to add a custom slide to any of the existing reports, or if you started with an empty report, you could just add a couple of slides and save them as a PDF. All of the slide options that are generated in the report are available in this list. You can filter it down based on the type of slide or the domains. So if I only wanted to look at bar charts for the teamwork domain, and I only wanted to see the ones that give the breakdown by work setting, I could apply that filter to the left, and now I've got a smaller set of slides to look at. Or you can filter it based on text. So if I remember that there was a question that was asking I would feel safe as a patient, I could just type in some of the keywords here and it'll filter it down to the questions that have that text in it. Once I've picked a particular slide to generate, I could go ahead and pick the options here, and maybe only have a certain set of work settings or a certain set of position types. And there's some additional options here in terms of what groups are being labeled. So if I wanted to, I could create a blinded report with maybe just the 4th floor being labeled here for this position type. So anything that is generated in a standard report, you can do here in the slide. And there's an additional tab here for the Scatterplots. And so this allows you to create custom Scatterplots as well. I could pick what's displayed on the x-axis here, what's displayed on the y-axis here, including any question or domain. If I just wanted to look at the domains, I could filter down that list. So for example, if I wanted to compare the safety climate to maybe one of the engagement domains like growth opportunities that maybe you wouldn't think might be correlated on the surface, and you can actually see that those two domains actually do correlate nicely for most data sets. And then I have the option of getting this broken down by work setting or by position type. I can further refine who is in the group that's being displayed. So for example, if I just wanted to do the nurses and do that by work setting, this would be a great slide for a nursing senior leadership manager to look at. And I'm going to go ahead and click add slide so you can see this. So this is how the nurses only look as broken out by the work settings, and I can see a very strong correlation between those two domains. I further have the option to pick which areas are being displayed. So maybe, again, let's say I was just debriefing the 4th floor, I could just highlight and display those two work settings only. Lastly, well, let me point you to some of the resources that are available here at the bottom. There's some links to PDFs that are especially helpful down below. This first link here is a reporting platform user guide. This covers similar concepts and instruction to what we've covered on the call today. So this is a great reference if you wanted to go back and have a guide in terms of how to generate reports and what the different report options are. That first PDF is a great place to look. The second PDF is a very comprehensive guide to all of the domains and all of the questions on the survey. And you'll see that it gives you both discussion questions and sample action items. So if, for example, I was low in one of the domains or one of the questions, I could go refer to this. And so let's say maybe it was this question here that I really wanted to focus on in a debriefing session. I've got some additional information on this domain or question listed. And then I've got some sample discussion questions that I could bring up in the debriefing session. And then I've got some things to consider when creating an action plan to improve this particular question. So that's available for all of the questions and domains. And it's a very comprehensive guide that's on here. And then finally, there's two other PDF reports or guides that are available here. This debriefing tips gives you a couple of quick tips in order to hold a very successful debriefing session. This is a great one-page resource to look at before you hold your debriefing session. And then finally, there's an improvement form, and this gives you a little bit of information on how to create an action plan, and then some potential questions to consider as you create an action plan. So those are all of the resources inside of the reporting platform. I'll open it up to see if there's any other questions before we close the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can you repeat that, Anita?
I just said no thanks because I need to reflect.
Sorry.
There's not a lot of information to take in.
Yeah. It's a pretty comprehensive reporting platform though, isn't it?
It certainly is. So will we be going over that tomorrow?
We'll be going through we'll have time to go through the reports as a team, yeah.
Yeah.
Could I just check whether the presentation will be available for staff who've not been able to join today to view it?
Yeah, so this is recording right now. After this meeting closes, it'll take a couple of hours to convert that to an MP4, and we'll post that on the website and send the link to everyone that's received the report, so you'll have the ability to go back and listen to this recording if you wanted to refer to it or you missed this call.
Yeah, I'll put it on the Moodle site as well, make sure everybody's got access to it.
Okay. Well, great. If there's any other questions that come up, you can feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about generating reports or how to properly read a particular graph inside of a report. I do know that we're also scheduling some debriefing sessions as well, and you'll receive some additional information about some potential times for that. And that will be a different format that'll actually have a clinical person on the call who will help walk through likely a blinded version of the reports from some of your groups and give you some additional suggestions and discussion points, for particular topics. If you're low in this group or question or domain, what you might want to consider. And so those are some upcoming calls that are still being scheduled.
Hey, Josh, Monica here. Can I just add a couple things according to my perspective, is that save as PDF button is great because once you save it as a PDF, you can scroll through it really fast. I don't know if that's what people are interested in, and the other thing is when you said, when you talk about the positive and negative, you were first helping me wrap my head around this, I think in terms of more desirable and less desirable responses or response trends. So I try to not use the word positive with myself much because you can have a positively worded question that has negative implications. So I just liked it when you explained it to me using, this is a more desirable answer, this is a less desirable answer. So I just want to underline that. Thanks.
Yep, thank you. And we always like to emphasize green is good no matter what you're looking at, whichever chart type. So yeah. Okay. Well, great. If there aren't any other additional questions, we'll go ahead and close this meeting and start processing the recording of this and send the link out to you afterwards. And then, Juliet, we can double check, see maybe the emails to you got filtered out.